In this video, I'm going to show you the brand new snippets with slots. So snippets aren't a new feature. They are here since day one, and they are an essential part of our template engine. So you probably already have seen them before. If you are brand new to Kirby, you might want to check out the videos first about templating in general and our docs as well about how to use templates and how to create snippets. Here's just a very quick reminder how they work. So in your templates, those snippets are basically a clever way to reuse code in multiple templates. So if you have something that is repeating over and over again in multiple templates, you can put it into a snippet and then include it from there in other templates and reuse it like this. So for example, what we would often see in Kirby templates is something like a header snippet that includes the top part of your document. And so far, the only way to pass content into a snippet has been via variables. So in such an array as a second argument, you could then, for example, give that header snippet an additional title. And that title would then become available in that header snippet. So for example, this is my title, and then I can use it in the header snippet. And those are really great and provide a very flexible way of building things. And snippets have been proven to be very stable and fast and just a great way to work with. But looking at especially this array of variables, this is only getting to a certain point. So for example, for such a title, it's great. It's really easy to pass that in there. Just think about if we would want to create an article and we want to provide text for that article. So as long as that text is just a bit of text, we could paste it here and that would be totally fine. But as soon as we want to create more text in there, and especially as soon as we want to use HTML for that, it gets quite messy because we have to write all that content into a PHP string. And mixing HTML into PHP strings is always kind of a shaky idea. For a few small elements, it's kind of okay, but as soon as the HTML gets more complex, it really starts to hurt. So what are those slots about? What is the idea behind the new feature for snippets? We are going to start with a very simple box. The idea is that we create something like a warning box or a banner box or something comparable to that. And again, we just want to pass in a bit of text, and we could totally do it like this. This would be my box, totally fine. And let's just do that for a second. So I'm creating a new snippet here in the snippet folder, and I'm going to call it box, not pox. And I'm going to create a div because our box is going to be a div, and it also has a CSS class. And then if I would use that text variable that I just passed in the template, I could do it like this. So if I store that and if I open the page, then my box gets rendered. And if I open the source code, I can see the div and the text within the box, and it's all working fine. But this box is exactly the same thing that I mentioned before with the article. Now I want to create more complex content for the box. I want to create a bit more text that should appear in that box. And this is where slots really start to shine. So I can start this new feature by activating slots like this. And this is a syntax that might be unfamiliar to you if you haven't worked with PHP 8 before. This has been introduced in PHP 8. It's called named parameters, and they are pretty awesome. So instead of being sure that you get the right order of arguments, you just have to know how they are named. And in this case, it's named slots. So it can come at any point, and you just have to remember that it's called slots. And then you can write it like this to activate the slots feature. If you haven't worked with name parameters before and you want to look more into them, you should really do that. It's a great feature in PHP 8. So as soon as we do that, we activate slots, and that kind of, you have to think about it like it opens the snippet. So this means now we also have to close the snippet again. Oops, not this. and I close it with end snippet. So now I have a snippet that I can pass content into. And I do this within or between the snippet opening function and the end snippet function. Hello world, because this is the most obvious text, right? So now we can use the space in between those functions to create any kind of content. This can be simple text again, but it can also be more complex HTML. But how do we access that? First, we define this text variable, and this text variable is no longer existing. We no longer pass it to the snippet. So we have to replace that. And we can replace it with our new slot variable. This is now available in snippets, and it takes the content for the default slot. I'm sorry. So by doing this, I have now access to whatever I put within the opening and the closing function of the snippet, and now it should be working again. So if I have a look at the source code, all it does is it puts the hello world text between the opening div and the closing div, just as we expected. So this is really cool, because within here now we can do all kinds of things. We could have a h2, a bit of paragraph, all kinds of things that you want to put into your box. This is really nice. And you can already see, okay, this is far better than using the text variable as we did before, because now I don't have to put all that HTML into a PHP string. So this is the basic principle of how to use a simple snippet with slots and a default slot. We can also have multiple slots for our box. So let's say our box also has a button, maybe to close the box again. So we create a button here, and by default this is the text for the button. It just says close, and if we reload that, the button is here and it should be closing the box. But we might want to adjust the close text for that button as well. Maybe it's not always close, it could be something else, maybe it's submitting something, I don't know, just as an idea. So we can have either just another variable, this is also possible, so we could go for something like this, close, and then just like we did before, pass some text in here. So this still keeps working. This feature is not disabled just because we use slots, we can combine them. But to demonstrate how you work with multiple slots, we can now define a new slot here. So we have the default slot up here, and we can create another slot for the text of the button. And we can do this by accessing the new slots variable. So those are two new variables available in snippets now. Slot is accessing the default slot, and slots is accessing any kind of slots. And we can now create a new slot by giving it a name with a method. For example, in this case, close or button. Let's say button. It's a bit more clear. This is something that we can totally define ourselves. We are not limited to certain names or certain, we're not limited to certain names. We can just give our own names to those. And this name is only relevant as soon as we start to fill in that slot. As long as that slot is not filled in, as long as we don't define it, it's just being rendered empty. And this one here is just a shortcut for slots default. Just so you know, you can also do this. If this is clearer to you, this is totally fine. Both ways work. We just keep it at slot for now. So now we have two slots. If we want to use those two slots, we have to change our code within the snippet a tiny little bit. So we have to wrap our default content, or for the content for the default slot, with our new slot methods. So they are called slot, and then we go for default here, and end slot. Come on. So this is the way how you wrap content in a slot. Again, the default slot is a bit of an exception. You can just do this again, or you can give it a full name. It's the same thing, basically. Sometimes it's easier if you use the name for clarity. In this case, I'm going to keep it. And as soon as we have wrapped our default content for the default slot in this slot functions, we can then define a second slot, or we can define the content for a second slot, in this case for our button. And this always corresponds with what we are doing here. So if this is called button, this should also be called button. This is the default one. This is the default one, just as I showed before. We don't want to put all this kind of stuff in here again, of course. So we are starting with close. So nothing should change in theory. If I reload, everything should stay the same. But now we have control over the button text as well. Close this. And now this changes as well. For the button text, it's kind of questionable if this is actually better than the variables. I would say no, you could totally just use the variables for here, as long as you never really want to put anything more complex than simple text in the button. You don't need it like this. But let's just think that maybe this box, this button for the box should also have an icon. So we want to define some SVG code here, and instantly it gets clear why this makes sense, and suddenly it's totally cool to have this as an additional slot. So this is all you basically have to know about snippets with slots. This is how you define slots. This is how you use them. You can have multiple slots, 3 or 4 or 5, however much you need, and you can create components like this. And we really think about it like components in Vue.js or in other web components, and it's super powerful like this. But this was just an example. What I want to show you now are various ways how you can use this for your own projects, and I want to give you a few real-world examples how you can use this. Some of you have maybe already been working with our layout plugin, and snippets with slots are basically replacing this. Our layout plugin was a fantastic way to create better, more flexible layouts than what you would just do with snippets. So in a typical scenario right now, if you don't use a layout plugin or you don't use the new slots in snippets, you would normally create a document by creating a header snippet and also a footer snippet. This is what we show in all our tutorials and documentation, etc. And it's just the most practical way to go so far. So then you would have the beginning of the HTML document at the top, basically, in this header snippet, and the end of it in the footer snippet. And every template would then define whatever HTML is between those. And this is totally cool, but you never really see the entire document at once. You don't see your full structure of the document. And there is now a better way to do this. What we are going to do is we are going to use a layout snippet. I've already defined this. I will go through you with this in a second. And again, activate our new slots feature. So now slots are enabled, and we are going to end this. And whatever will be poured into our layout comes in between. Again, simple hello world. And now it looks like this. I've prepared a bit of a scaffold for this with some styles and a menu. And I'm going to walk you through the layout now. So I've defined a new layout snippet, which is here. And it looks like this. So instead of separating it into header and footer, I've created the entire document here. So as you can see, here's our HTML element, our head element, our body element. That's the full structure for our document in this layout snippet. And what I've did, most of the stuff should probably look familiar to you if you've worked with Kirby before. I'm loading a CSS file here. I'm putting the page title into the document title. So not really any kind of black magic. There is a menu with a regular snippet. There is the logo with the URL, and then the footer and the main part. But now the difference is that there is a new head slot which I'm going to show you in a second what it is all about. And there is the main slot, the default slot. And the default slot will put the content that we put per default into the layout snippet in between the main elements. Or not the main elements, between the main element. And this is a bit of a special case down here. There's another slot for the footer. So we could, in theory, also customize whatever is in the footer of this document. And I showed you before that we can access slots that are not filled. So even if a slot is, if you don't use or define a slot in your template, you can still reference it and it won't break, it just won't render anything. And this is super useful. For example, in this case, you might not want to customize the footer for every template, just for some templates. In this case, what we can do is we can create an if clause like this, and we can check, is this footer slot empty or not? Assign it to a footer variable in the same way, and then echo whatever is in the footer slot, if it has been filled in. And otherwise, we fall back to this simple copy line here, copyright line. And this means whenever we feel like we need to replace this, we can replace it. Otherwise, it will just stick around and we see our copyright line at the end of our page. And you can do this in multiple ways like this. You can either define simple fallback content like this, or you could just, you could also remove the entire footer element, for example, if it's not needed, or you could replace the footer element with whatever is in here if you wrap the if clause around the footer. So it gives you a very flexible way to adjust the HTML document based on what kind of slots are filled in and available, or if they are not defined. Back to the head element. This is maybe one of that features that explains the benefits of such a system the best. If you've ever worked with different page types and more complex pages where you want to make sure that search engine optimization is really on point, or you just generally try to customize certain page types as much as possible, you will always get to that point where you think like, shit, I have to inject something into the head element. I need some additional meta attributes, meta elements, or I need a custom style block, or I need, just additional stuff for the head. And the head slot in this case is just a perfect way to solve this. So we have defined our default content here, and it appears within the main elements, as I just showed you before. So if we open the source code for this, you can see the entire document is printed, and then we have hello world between our main, or in the main element. And let's say for this page type, we want to adjust the styling for this. And we don't want to load an extra CSS file for that. We just want to hack in a little bit of style adjustments. So just like with the box before, what we are going to do first is we're going to wrap the default content in a slot. Don't have to name this again because this is the default one. And then as soon as we did that, we can use a new slot for the head. So now whatever we put in here, this is now in the head, should be placed inside our head element. If we have a look at it, here's our new comment. And this means that we can now do stuff like this. Style, if I type it right, auto-completion is kind of weird. So let's just say, we are super into the design phase and we want to make everything red because that's our thing. So now we can easily hack the styles of this page type and adjust it in every other template as well, and make different colors, or I don't know, different layouts, whatever you prefer. So this is a really, really effective way to adjust the head element, add additional elements, styles, whatever you want. And I guess this should already give you a good example or a good idea how you can use this with layouts to really get the best out of it. add additional slots if you need to. If you have more complex layouts, you could also have a slot for the hero image or a slot for different columns or different layouts. So this is really, really up to you and your projects. I have a couple more examples how you can use them in real time, in real life, because I really think that such concepts get clearer and clearer the more you use them and the more you see them in the wild. And another good example is the article layout here. So this would be just a very simple blog article layout with 2 columns, or basically 3 columns, a 3-column grid, and a place where we have to work with the title, the text, and also the sidebar here. So let me open this template for you and show you what I did there. So here's the article template, and this is how it looks. So I've reused the layout because the document is the same and it's working well. Again, I could now inject something into the head if I wanted to, but this is fine like it is. And instead of manually setting up the grid system now for this body part, I'm going to use a new snippet called article, because this kind of layout here with 2/3 on the left and 1/3 on the right and the title on top of that, this is something that I want to reuse for different page types. It can also be used for a speaker profile or a project profile or about page or pretty much various pages that come with a similar layout. So I just abstracted it to be reused later. And for this, I also activated the slots again, and I have defined a title slot, a sidebar slot, and a text slot. And what I'm filling in here now is the title, as you can see, and it will be filled into an H1 element. The sidebar gets this nice little figure with the author image, and then there's just a text, a basic text with paragraphs. And of course, all of this could also come from your content files. This could also come from the page object. I've just put it in here as pure HTML to give it a bit more, to make it a bit easier to understand what's happening here. But this is not limited to pure HTML. Of course, this can all be dynamic and inserted from the page as well. And I think it's quite easy to understand. So this part is now building the body, and it is filling in those slots. And if we have a look at the snippet itself looks actually pretty simple. It's just an article element with an H1 with the column system. This is a custom grid system. Those damn how are they called? Popovers are a bit annoying. I'm sorry about those. So this is just a custom grid system. Then there's a text column and the side column, the sidebar, and I'm using the slots again to access the title, the text, and the sidebar. Again, here I decided not to use the default slot. I called it text. This is totally up to you. As I said, there is no strict rule around this. And as you can see, what I really love about this is that it's so easy to scan and to understand what's happening here and how those slots are being used. And it's also cool because this can be restructured at any time and the slots are still available, and you can just make sure that the HTML structure is always correct. And this means the order of the slots is not relevant. So you could totally put the title slot in the middle and it wouldn't really matter. This doesn't change the HTML structure. It just changes the way that you fill in those slots. If you feel like this is more understandable to you, then go for it. Otherwise, you can just leave it up there and follow more of the structure that is also in the snippet. But as I said, it doesn't really matter. One cool thing that I also wanted to show you, you've seen before how I've created this if clause for the footer in the layout snippet to have this fallback content there. And we can do the same thing here. So let's say this H1, to fill this H1 with a slot is a bit like with the button before for the box. If it's just text, it might never be needed in this way. But you never know. Maybe this H1 content also needs some HTML, so you actually want that flexibility, and that's totally fine. And what we can do though is we can simplify this by saying whenever we have custom HTML for that title and we want to use the slot, then go for it. And otherwise, we just fall back to the page title because that makes a lot more sense actually. This is just another way that you can create default content or default fallback content, I'm sorry. So you check for the slot. If the slot is not there, it's going to be null. And this means that we can use the operator like this to fall back to whatever this is. And this means everything should be the same as long as the slot title is defined, and as soon as it's no longer defined, it falls back to the page title. This is just another way that you can work with those slots and be sure that you always get what you want out of them. I guess looking at this, it's clear that we could now totally modify the sidebar for different page types, have a link list in there or additional text, or I don't know, whatever fits in there. And I really like this idea of having more rudimentary elements that help you lay out your page or your templates for different page types. This could be different kinds of column systems, different kinds of layouts in general that are then placed and combined. And you can really play puzzle with those snippets here as you want. Another very typical example that we have to solve so many times are such card elements to highlight content or to combine text with images or text with video. And I wanted to show you again how you can use the new snippets with slots to create those cards. The template looks like this. Again, I'm using the layout, just defining an H1 over there. And then I've defined two cards. The first one is using the video function to embed a YouTube video, and the second one is manually defining an image with a link wrapped in a link. And again, those card snippets have two slots. There's a figure slot and there's a content slot, and they can be filled in with whatever you want to fill into those cards. I'm defining some custom headlines here and a paragraph, same here. So, and pretty much like with the article snippet, the final card is quite simple. So it is a figure element. It has a bit of a wrapping div here to make sure that whatever is in that figure has the right size. And then it uses the fig caption to show the content. Nice and simple. Again, super flexible. If you look at the output, it could be anything. So it doesn't really matter if you put a graph here or a video or photo like I did here, or a code block, for example, to show some content. This could be a feature highlight, like Apple style stuff, or the things that we build on our release pages when we introduce a feature. You could easily combine this with variables to adjust the orientation. So for example, the order could be switched, and in some cases the text could be on the left and the video on the right. So you could play with the layout of it. And it's just very flexible and universally usable like this, which I like a lot. As a third and almost final example, I have code blocks. Code blocks are another thing that are a bit annoying sometimes, because whatever comes inside the code block or whatever is inside the code block has to be properly escaped, especially if it's HTML or JavaScript, because otherwise it would be rendered. And this is not what we want. We want to show the code for it or not the elements, or trigger the JavaScript stuff that is inside the script element. So the snippets with slots really help here to get the best out of code blocks, make them super easy to introduce to templates, or again fill them in with content from pages. And the great part about this is, so if you look at this, this is pure HTML here, and in theory this should be rendered. It's kind of weird to see it like this here, because it would totally be invalid if we just put it inside a code block like that. But the content of snippets is passed as variables in the end. So I'm using the default slot method here again, and that is just returning whatever is in that default slot. So we can work with those slot variables afterwards. We can, mutilate or modify the content however we like. We can make it uppercase or lowercase, or shorten it, or whatever. You can basically do whatever you want with PHP functions with that content. What I'm doing here is I have a little bit of an unindent logic that just removes some of the tabs, because if you look back at the template, there are quite a few tabs that we don't want in front of the code. So like those two are too much again here. So this is basically removing all of this, the first two tabs for every line. And then it's also converting this to HTML special chars. And in addition to that, it could also take care of syntax highlighting, or it could prepare syntax highlighting if you use JavaScript-based syntax highlighting. And then it's just placing it in the code block. And we get nice code blocks without rendered JavaScript or without rendered HTML. And it's really, really cool and nice, easy to use. Last but not least, there are forms, and forms are always such a big, I don't want to say it. Yeah, they are such a hassle. And snippets with slots help a lot to make them easier. So this is how the form looks in the template. And I use two snippets that help with this. Well, one snippet is a form snippet, and it defines a default slot to just take the fields inside that form. It also has a submit button built right in. And then a universal field snippet that is used to render whatever is inside there. So it helps with the labels, and then it just takes any kind of input, text input or text area, you name it. And again, those elements those snippets are quite simple. So the form snippet uses the slot method to display the default content for the slot. This is just very, very rough here. It could also define the action to go to the right URL. It could also define a cancel button or whatever. And you could also have additional slots to customize the buttons, for example, again, to customize the submit button or replace the buttons entirely. All of this is totally possible, but I just wanted to keep it simple here. And then in addition to that, the field, again, is quite simple. It lacks a lot of features, but I guess you can totally see where we could take this. So it defines a label. We could easily just add required attributes here as well. We have basic handling for the for attribute. And yeah, quite simple again. And super powerful in the end. So we can have a form in just a few lines of code. And most importantly, this form is very extensible. So we can create our own inputs here. We can have field sets. And in addition to that, we could have so much more than that. And as a last step, what I wanted to show you is how you can then take this as a starting point and make it even simpler, because snippets are indefinitely nestable, which is quite cool. And this doesn't change with slots. It just gets better with slots. So for example, if we want to reuse this email field multiple times now in multiple forms, we could just take this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder in the snippets folder, and I'm going to call it fields. And inside there, I am going to create a new email snippet. And I'm going to paste that field code there. And now we need to make a few adjustments to make it universally usable. That has to change. So we define an ID that needs to be present. If I can type, and we use that for the for attribute for the label, and we also use it for the ID attribute for the input. And we are also going to make the label adjustable. And this is pretty much it. So now we have a fully working email field that can now be used by getting rid of all this and turn this into email and turn this into ID. And then that's pretty much it. So no longer any need for the slots. This is now, again, a simple snippet, but it has all the benefits of the slots that we used before. So it's still, you can use that field. It can nicely define whatever is within that field. And so yeah, we can build. This is just another way of building on top of each other. The brick system just gets better and better with this. I hope this video shows why we are so excited about this feature. We really believe that it takes templating in Kirby to a whole new level. And what we are kind of proud about, to be honest, is that it is a very humble feature. So it doesn't add a lot of code to the core. It's very efficient. It doesn't come with complex caching mechanisms or anything else. It is just very fast, and it's pretty much the same as Snippets have ever been, just so much more powerful. And this can be used, like components can be used, like you know from components and other systems. It can be used like traditional snippets. It can be used like a layout engine. It's really, really cool. And we cannot wait to see what you build with it. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye bye.